It is about time I got this guy on the show. This episode of Podcastification, I'm talking with Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting. My name is Kerry Green, and I am the Client Happiness Guy at PodcastFastTrack.com, and this is Podcastification. This show is all about podcasting. How to do it, how not to do it, best practices, interesting news items that have to do with the realm of podcasting, and who knows what else. And I'm trying to do it all with a little bit of fun and some information to help you get a show going, keep yours going, or make it better. And if you like what's going on here on the show, I would appreciate it, so appreciate it, if you could leave a rating or review on iTunes. You can find out how to do that at podcastfasttrack.com/review. That's enough of that kind of stuff. Let's get you podcastificated right away. Well, if you have never heard of Dave Jackson when it comes to the podcasting realm, you are in for a treat today. Dave is such a generous and kind guy. He's funny, he's fun, he's great to have a conversation with, and he's been doing this podcasting thing long before I showed up on the scene. Dave is one of those guys who pioneered some of the initial technologies and ways of doing podcasting, and he's just been so helpful to so many people. In fact, when I first started learning what it meant to podcast and how to actually make it happen, Dave is one of those guys I listened to and I learned from just by listening to his show. He gives away so much great content, and he also does podcast coaching through his School of Podcasting. So I don't want to waste any more time. I want you to get to meet Dave and hear what he's got to share on this episode. David Jackson, you're on the Podcastification podcast. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you, Kerry?
I'm doing well. Hey, I have a treat for the audience here. I have a clip from your very first School of Podcasting morning. What did you call it? Morning?
Yeah, it was called the School of Podcasting's Morning Announcements.
Announcements. That's it. Yeah.
Get it? It's the whole school thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And you had the actual school bell going on and all that stuff. So here, let me play it, and then I want to get your reaction because you've been at this for quite a while.
It's the School of Podcasting's Morning Announcements. Here's Dave Jackson.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the very first installment of the School of Podcasting's Morning Announcements. Yeah, one of the things we talk about at the School of Podcasting is your first podcast typically stinks. Yeah, it's usually pretty bad. So I'm going to try to avoid that, but I do have a dilemma. Well, first of all, I'm your host, Dave Jackson, sometimes known as Jammin' Dave Jackson, sometimes known as Dean Jackson, Principal Jackson. Take your pick. You can call me Dave, and you can subscribe to this podcast.
Yeah.
That's way back when.
That's a long time ago. That was pre-cell phones with it's back in the day kind of thing. And it could have been worse.
Yeah. Is it accurate to call you the Podfather? Could we do that?
No, you'll make a lot of people mad doing that. There's only one Podfather. That's Adam Curry, the guy that helped to invent podcasting.
Yeah.
I've had people call me the dean of podcasting because of the School of Podcasting.
Yeah, there you go.
I don't know about that, but I've been doing it a while.
Maybe you could be president emeritus or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, that is funny. Well, maybe we could call you the pod stepfather or something like that. I don't know. Anyway, glad to have you on the show, Dave. I just kind of wanted to talk some about your journey, where you started, why you started, and what you've seen happen over all these many years that you've been podcasting. So let's see. You started back in 2000 what?
2005. April 2005 was when I jumped in.
Wow. I don't think in 2005 I even knew a podcast was a thing.
Well, I just remember I had a friend of mine. He had come back from some sort of big marketing guru thing, And I had missed, which again tells you how long ago it was, I'd missed the MySpace boat. And he said, you know how you missed the MySpace boat? I'm like, yeah. He goes, I've seen what's coming down the pike, man. You got to get into this. This will be great for you. And I go, what is it? And he goes, podcasting. And I'm like, what's a podcasting? And I just remember Googling it. And literally there was maybe a page, tops a page and a half of results. There just wasn't anything about it. And when I finally kind of pieces parted one together, I downloaded this software that was called, I think it was iPod or Lemon or something like that. It was later called Juice. And I remember I heard the voice of Adam Curry, the guy from MTV, come out of my speakers. And I was like, well, this is cool. And I literally just pieces, like it was, paper clips and rubber bands and one together. And I just remember when I uploaded my MP3 file and then I saw it come down into this software, I went, oh, now I get it. And I just went, oh, this could be really, really cool. Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah, so that was back in the days of dial-up, right?
Just about, yeah. I mean, it's not too far from it. There was no iTunes, or there was no podcasting on iTunes. There was no, even back then, I think the iPod was new. And I had this little thing called an iRiver about the size of your thumb. And the fun part of it was, you would basically fire up your software. So in my case, I was using this thing called Juice. It would download all your MP3 files. You would then plug in this little device, which was kind of like plugging in a thumb drive, which probably didn't exist then either. And you would drag these files onto this little player. And then I would take it in my car and I would plug it into my cassette adapter and plug it in there and listen to, and you'd listen to the, 6 or 7 podcasts you had. And the job I had at the time, I was a copier repairman. So I would listen to all these episodes in the car. And then when you're done, you're like, what do you mean I'm out of podcasts? So it's, yeah. And then you have to come back, and I eventually bought this big giant iPod with 60 gigs of space on it or something like that. But even that, you had more room, but if you ran out, it was like, I got to go home and sync to my home computer. So that was the biggie. When the cell phones came and, the podcast app came aboard, it was really easy because now you just find a Wi-Fi spot and download some more and you keep on going.
So your friend says, hey, you can't miss this boat like you missed the other boat. What was it that was such an appeal to you that you decided, yeah, I'm going to invest the time to learn what this is and actually do it?
At the time, I had a newsletter that had a decent amount of people for musicians. And I could see kind of already, I was doing more or less audio on a website. I had started recording. You want to hear really bad recordings. I was like putting a microphone in front of a speakerphone and interviewing musicians. So it was horrendous sounding. But even that, I would then put it on a website. And even that, I was getting more engagement because you go from being words on a page to, hey, there's actually a person behind this website. And we're actually getting to hear, these musicians and their tips and things like that. So I knew already the power of audio. And then when I saw how, okay, this would make it super easy to get that audio to people's computers, I was like, oh, this is going to be cool. And I think like everybody else, I have audio of myself with my grandma doing WHOME, which was into a little cassette deck, and we were playing radio.
It's time for the news.
And so I think we've all kind of had that. And even when I was a teenager, I worked in a grocery store. And even if I was like, all right, we need a price check on, Miracle Whip, they were like, man, you should be on the radio. So I've always had that thing. And then my background's I'm a musician, so I had a bunch of microphones lying around and stuff. So I was just like, hey, let's give this a shot. And then at the time it came about, my background was in electronic engineering, but I fell into training. And so it was weird because I didn't really have a degree in training, and I had lost one of my training jobs, and I went to get another job, and they're like, well, you don't have a degree in education. I'm like, I know, but look at my resume. I've been doing it for 10 years and they really didn't care. And I finally talked to a friend of mine that was in HR, and they said, yeah, if you want to do training, you got to go get another degree. At the ripe old age of 42, I went back to college, which was great because you'd walk in and people would go, oh, are you the teacher? And I'm like, no, I'm a student. So I started the School of Podcasting, which is funny because I tell everybody, don't get into podcasting if your goal is to make money quick, because I was like, I need something to keep me in my phone, car insurance, gas, and books. I was lucky enough, I was living with my brother at the time, and he's like, look, I'm not going to charge you rent, but you can stay here until you get back on your feet. And so the School of Podcasting was born, and I didn't really know where I was going, but as I was learning how to podcast, I was making tutorials based again on my training background on how to set up a RS feed and all the other fun-filled stuff. So that's kind of how it was born out of, like, I need money now. And of course, that's it, like everybody else, that doesn't work. You've got to take some time to build your audience, and then you monetize your audience. And those people that come to me and go, yeah, I want to quit my job and do this in 6 weeks. I'm like, yeah, that's not gonna happen.
Well, let's talk about that, because I hear many questions from clients, from people who are potential clients, about, best launch strategy, best new and noteworthy strategy, best way to get your audience built in a quick amount of time. I haven't found that magic potion. Have you?
No. And what I really hate to see is I see a lot of people that put all their eggs in the new and noteworthy basket. If I just do all this and I've got my magic 8 weeks of unicorns and everything else will happen. And I even bought a domain. If you go to newandnoteworthy.info, where I've taken from interviews from other people that, like, for one, Elsie Escobar from Libsyn they were not in new and noteworthy. They were on the front page of iTunes. Like, you can't get any more front and center. And you would think they got 3, 5, 10,000 downloads. They got hundreds, maybe 100. They said maybe 200 after being up there for a couple weeks. So it's not this giant fire hose that's just going to send, you massive traffic. And so I see everybody, I've heard of people that actually go through all the trouble of setting up a podcast, and they've started to get a little bit of steam, and their magic 8 weeks is over, and they'll actually go back and, like, restart the whole process over again because they didn't get into new and noteworthy. And I'm like, really, it's not the giant light switch that you think it is. So I always find that sad, that people will just abandon where they're at and turn around. And the people that I talk to that are really making headway, they've got sponsorship or whatever it is you're trying to do, you're really engaged with your audience. It's usually somewhere between 1 and 3 years. For me, at least the people I'm talking to, 3 years really seems to be where people are like, wow, this is great. They've really got momentum and it's really growing on their own. But that first year is the brutal one, because you're kind of tapping your microphone going, is this thing on? Is anybody listening? And I'm not getting any feedback. I always say we want our podcast to be a Ferrari. Who doesn't? We all want a bigger audience. There's nothing wrong with that. But I always say I think it's more like a locomotive, the old trains with the whistle. And if you think about it, those things start really, really slow. But once they get going, that's the reason there's a cow catcher in the front of that thing, because you can't stop it. I think podcasts are a little more like a locomotive than a Ferrari. They don't come out of the gate doing 90 plus. It takes a while to get going, but once it get going, it's awesome.
As I'm thinking about what you're saying, I've only had 1 or 2 people that I know of whose story is different than that out of the, I don't know, maybe up to 100 people I've worked with now in launching or, managing a podcast. And those 2 had some very unique situations that were a part of their story. One was, it was the niche he was in and the timing with which he started talking about the niche. And that niche was Amazon private label sales, and he got into it just as that whole thing started. He began podcasting in a very genuine way, just telling his story, telling what he was doing, talking about the new news from Amazon, all that. And he, within 13, 14 months, was up to probably 6,000 downloads per episode. It's pretty amazing, but that's not the normal. The other one was a woman who already had 25,000 people on her mailing list, and she had over 1,000 downloads her first day that she started her podcast. But again, she got 25,000 people she's telling about it who already like her content. To me, those are if there is a magic formula, that's the magic formula. You have to have a following already that you're drawing from.
And you have to be able to go find your audience. I think one of my favorite examples was, she doesn't do it anymore. Her name's Kathy Kelly. She did a show called Special Mouse. Her son had autism, and she loved Disney. And so she did a show about how to take people with special needs to an amusement park, hence the name Special Mouse. And she didn't have a giant audience, but the people that found it were like, oh my gosh, I thought I was the only person that was going through this scenario. And she actually ended up getting a sponsor because there was somebody in Florida that specialized in transporting people with special needs. And they're like, oh, that guy looked at her and said, oh, wow, you have my target audience. So even though she didn't have this giant 10,000 downloads per episode, she was still able to find a sponsor because she found somebody who fit her niche.
And I think that leads into another way of reframing this in our own minds, because I think a lot of this is mental. You may be discouraged, to think, oh, I'm only getting 100 downloads an episode. But let's reframe that. Say you were in a room in your local library and 100 people showed up to hear you talk for 45 minutes. that sounds a lot different.
Oh, yeah.
That feels significant. Well, that's what's happening.
Yeah, I always say my background's in training, and for me, a big class was 20 people. To hold people's attention and make sure they were going to understand what you're talking about. 20 is a pretty full class. And so when I hear somebody say, oh, I've only got 100 downloads, I'm like, number one, I think back to the old building I used to teach in, that'd be the whole floor. 5 classrooms of 20 people that in a day of Netflix and AM, FM and Sirius satellite and everything else on demand, they've chosen to listen to you because there is no spam in podcasting. The only reason they're listening is because they click play because they found you. So I always kind of cringe when I hear the word only. I've only got 60 downloads or I've only got 50. I'm like, that's 2 classrooms.
Yeah, it's pretty significant. And those are people that have self-selected.
Yep.
They've picked you. I mean, that's significant. What do you tell people when they show up to your school of podcasting or they're talking about signing up for your coaching and things, and they say things like, I want to hit it big in 6 weeks or in 2 months, I want to have this thing, at the top of iTunes rankings. I mean, what do you say to them? Because you and I both know that's typically not possible.
I point out the fact that in a way, podcasting is the entertainment industry. Yes, people use it to educate and inform and things like that. But in the end, there's a little bit of entertainment involved. And I'm like, so you have kind of the same, what's the word here? The same chance of making it big as a musician. And maybe it's my background in music. Everybody wants to move to Nashville and get signed or LA or whatever and, be big. And that's not to say that you can't. But in the end, you have to have some stars aligned for that. And like you mentioned earlier, if you come with a pre-made audience, that's great. In fact, there are a lot of people that are especially now with the ESPN laying off a bunch of people, all those people are coming to podcasting. So they've already got an audience built in, and that's great. And so I always just tell them I always say maybe I'm the worst salesman for podcasting because I tend to tell it like it is. I was doing a presentation at Kent State University here in Ohio for local business people, and they were all fired up. And then I get to this slide and I go, if you're going to do everything yourself, you're looking at about a 4-to-1 ratio. So if you want to do an hour-long podcast, it's going to take you about 4 hours by the time you figure out what you're going to talk about, record it, edit it, and then publish it. And that's where you come in, of course. You take the time suck out. But if you're not taking the time suck out, it's a 4-to-1 ratio. And they all went, well, hold on a second. So yeah, that's always kind of an eye opener too, that I think people think, I just talk into a microphone and I become famous.
Yeah, no, doesn't work that way.
Another great tool too is, iTunes it's the big gorilla in the room. It's got probably anywhere from 60 to 80% of the downloads. And I always say, but in the end, it's a phone book. Really, that's all it is. It's a phone book. And I'm in the phone book in Ohio, but
what's a phone book?
Yeah, for those of us that remember these big yellow things they would drive. The last time I got one, I'm like, wow, they still make these?
Yeah, they threw one in my driveway just 2 weeks ago, and I was shocked. I just couldn't believe we even had one.
Well, and it really is. That's really what's changed. You used to have the big phone book, and you would go through and you would get your kid's school number and the local pizza people and everybody else and Aunt Martha and Uncle Bill, and you would put them into this local little itty bitty book that you stuck in the drawer by the phone. It's the same thing. You get this big, huge phone book of iTunes with hundreds of thousands of podcasts in them, and you make your own little local phone book on your phone using the podcast app or Overcast or whatever you're using. It's the same theory. We all just have our own little phone books now of the things that we need.
Yeah, the things that are of interest to us and are the things we want to learn. So, I mean, we kind of beat this horse to death. I mean, you've got to be able to put in the work. You've got to be willing to devote the time to make a good show, which brings me to one of your more recent School of Podcasting episodes. You were on the soapbox for a while talking about quality, and you were using a comedian as an example of that from his book. Why don't you give us a little snapshot of that?
Yeah, there are 2 comedians that got me on this kick. One was I watched a master class with Steve Martin. Now, I grew up in the late 70s, and Steve Martin was huge, and the Wild and Crazy Guy and the Arrow in the Head and all that stuff. So I tuned in just because I was a huge fan. And he said there are so many people in comedy, they come up to him and they're like, how do I get a manager? How do I get an agent? How do I get this stuff? And he goes, and nobody's asking me, how do I get good? Because it doesn't matter if you get an agent and a manager. If you aren't packing people in the clubs, there's nothing to manage. There's no jobs to get. And so I read this book by Kevin Hart, who's another comedian. And to say he had a hard life is the world's biggest understatement. And he just, every time he got a setback, he was like, all right, I'm just going to go back and work on being the best comic I can be. And then he'd get like a TV show, and at literally the last minute, they would pull out the rug from underneath of him. And most people would just cry and moan, and they'd quit probably. I know I would have quit. And he's like, all right, well, I'm just going to go back and I'm going to become such a big comic that they have to put me in a movie and they have to put me in a TV show. And of course, now every time you turn around, there's a Kevin Hart movie. But the big thing there was his complete obsession with being the best kind of comic he could. And a lot of that was pulling stories out of his life. He actually has a pretty funny life. His father was just a complete character. So that was part of it, making it very personal. So people, when you go to see his concert, you kind of, yes, you're laughing, but you're also getting to know him, and that creates that relationship with his audience. So they want to come back and support you now because they feel like they know you. And then it's just how good can I get? And then promoting yourself. Towards the end of the book, he talks about how he started getting into social media and using that to get the word out. But in the end, I think we all, and I try not to be guilty of this myself, we have an idea what we think is good. And I think we all need to think about creating what I would call is a focus group. If you can find 4 or 5 people that you think are your target audience, not named Mom or Uncle Mary, this is a new one.
Yes, I must say the wine is quite delightful.
Somebody not named Mom, to give you some honest feedback, not to just tear you apart, but say, hey, here's what I'm doing good. Here's what I think, you might think about, not doing or things like that. Because any business, before they build a product, the first thing they do is, get some of their target audience in there. I was just watching The Profit on CNBC, and there was a company doing bathing suits. And same thing, this designer did all these great designs, and they're all floral patterns and all this other wild stuff on it. Then they said, okay, who's your target audience? And they brought in a bunch of their target audience, and their target audience went, I'd never wear that. And so they went back to the drawing board and asked them, well, what would you wear? And they well, I like this and I like that. And they brought out some examples. Oh, that's beautiful. And I think we need to do that a little bit is maybe find some people who aren't afraid. I always say, if you could just listen to my podcast and talk about it like I'm not in the room, and then be willing to kind of step back and go, you know what? Maybe they do have a point. Maybe I should have moved that to the end of the show, or maybe I should get to the meat and potatoes sooner, or maybe my audio isn't as good as I thought it was. Things like that. And I'm not sure we're willing to do that. That's a tough pill to swallow. But in the end, if you have a long-term goal of, I really want this to be good and I really want to connect, most really good ideas. And I mentioned earlier the people that had been doing it a year or 3 years. Those people had changed their format and mixed things around based on feedback from their audience. I don't know that most people are going to come out of the gate doing it 100% perfect.
No, I sure didn't. Absolutely not. And you get all these dreams of grandeur in your head about how it's going to sound and the great way people are going to respond. And, like you're saying, you have to iterate, you have to tweak, you have to find what your audience likes.
And that means it might be scary. I started something this year where I said, I'm going to try something with my audience. And I gave them, every month I give them a new question that they have to answer. So like this month's question is, how many strikes do you give somebody before you unsubscribe? Or how many listens do you give somebody before you go, no, I'm not going to subscribe? So kind of how many strikes do you give somebody? That's this month's question. And the first time I did this, I said, you're going to have a lot of egg on your face if nobody replies to this. And I was very lucky that my audience was responsive, and they've been really good at every month. They're kind of going in that. And I do that because I also promote their show and kind of give them a little nudge. But there was one of those things I'm like, I'm going to do this, and this could really blow up in my face. So I think sometimes trying new things, you have to have a little bit of courage. And if it doesn't work, it's not really a failure. You just know, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So the point being in all of this, concentrate on making a good show first before you concentrate on getting a huge audience. I mean, I've got some new clients. They've actually got a pretty good idea for a show, but their questions have all been about how to get a big audience. And and they asked the new and noteworthy question, all that sort of stuff. And I said, here's the thing. If you concentrate on getting to new and noteworthy, you might get there. But if you concentrate on being really, really good, it might not matter if you get there.
Right.
Because your show's good and your audience loves it. So I think we've probably beat that horse to death. But that's a huge thing.
Well,
it's just massive.
Can I beat it one more time?
Yeah, go ahead. I hear it whinnying right now.
Yeah, well, speaking of whinnying, it's a great example from Rob Walsh, who you've had on the show many times, and he talks about the movie The Lone Ranger. And I remember when that came out, it was the one with Johnny Depp. They were the Happy Meals were ready to go, and all the figurines and the Lone Ranger hats and guns and toys, everything was ready to go except for one thing, and that movie was horrible. And so in some cases, it doesn't matter how much you promote yourself. In the end, if your show isn't good, if the movie isn't any good, all you're going to do is let the world know sooner not to listen to your show. So
yeah.
You got to keep that.
I think case in point for that, that movie was nothing more than just an excuse to put Johnny Depp's bizarreness on stage. And the thing that proves that to me is that he wasn't even the Lone Ranger.
Right.
He was the secondary character, and yet nobody remembers the main actor's name.
No, I don't. I don't. It's the other guy.
It's that Johnny Depp movie that didn't work. That's how we know it. So anyway, focus on making your show great. There's a great book recommendation I can make. A guy named Cal Newport borrowed Steve Martin's line, "So good they can't ignore you." And he wrote a book by that title. And it's an incredible study of how people come into their mastery and the journey that they go on. And it's kind of an anti-follow your passion kind of a book, not in a way of saying that's altogether evil, but it is saying if you start there, you're probably going to have a harder time finding your passion than if you just concentrate on being good at whatever you're doing. Doors just tend to open up then that lead to your passion. So anyway, great book. If you haven't read it, it's definitely worth the time. He's written a new one now that I can't remember what it's called, but I plan to get it too real soon.
Nice.
So Dave, tell us some of your most bizarre podcasting experiences, either with clients or guests on your show, or things that you never would have saw that coming.
This one always makes me scratch my head. I've met people and they'll come up to me and they're like, "Oh, you're Dave Jackson." I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Oh, wow, I listened to your show." I'm like, "Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that." And they'll go, "You sound shorter." And I'm not sure what that means. Like, okay.
Oh my, does that mean you've got a squeaky mouse voice or something? I don't know.
I don't know what that means.
We're talking about making a show good. I've had people that come up with an idea for a show and then they'll have a goal for their show, and the two are completely not related at all. So I'm going to interview other entrepreneurs about business. Great. What's the overall goal of your show? Oh, well, I want to promote these figurines that I make. And you're like, what? And you're like, okay, it's a business maybe, or something like that. There's two unrelated things. So, and that's sometimes where you might have a great show, but because your goal, like the overall goal of what you want to do with the audience that you build, it's one of those things where if they're not in alignment, then you're going to end up quitting, because even though the show is good, your goals are not good. And then the other, probably the weirdest thing I've ever been hired to do. And I remember when she approached me with this, I'm like, "Are you sure?" And
this is a family show, Dave. Can you tell this?
Oh yeah, I can tell this. It was
okay.
And that was, I was hired to do the voiceover and all the production. They would just provide me with the topic and I would talk about it. And it was the history of makeup. And actually, this is a great example of not having things in alignment. So I would do the history of makeup, and it was all about, back in the days of Egypt, they would rub coal and something together and you would put it on your eye. And in some cases, it would make you go blind, all this weird history of makeup stuff. And the goal of it was to get the name of this health spa in front of people where you could come and, get beauty treatments. So I kind of get it, but it was just, and I said, "Are you sure you don't want me to work with somebody who's a female?" I said, "I see a female doing this because I personally don't wear a lot of makeup." And I said, "It might be better." And they're like, no, we like your voice. And I'm like, okay. And so it wasn't great content. I didn't really, aside from the couple that were like, "Yeah, if you put this on your skin, it burns you," and things like that. And I'm like, but who is going to do that? I don't think Revlon is putting out any, makeup that's going to make you go blind. So it was just very weird. And it lasted about, I would say, 6 or 7 episodes before she said, "Yeah, I'm not really getting the returns I thought I was going to." And the whole time I was very politely saying, "I don't think this is very good. I don't think this is going to resonate with your target audience." I guess that's the polite way you say it. I don't think this is going to resonate with your target audience. So that was one that I scratched my head on and went, yeah.
That brings up a related point that we were talking about just a little while ago, and that is, in 7 weeks, she's saying, this isn't getting the return I was wanting. Well, you can't expect it in 7 weeks. I mean, in 7 weeks of starting this particular podcast that we're on right now, I was having like 12 downloads per episode in 7 weeks. I mean, if you expect greater than that, you're expecting the wrong thing.
I agree with that. And I think sometimes that has to do with kind of our microwave mentality. We're so used to get movies on demand, music on demand. You know, the minute a movie is out of the theater, it's about 2 weeks and it's in Redbox, so you can kind of get it there. And so I think we're kind of slowly turning into an impatient society. And so when you take the time and you create this great show and it really is good and it's going to resonate, well, the fun part is now you've got to go find your audience, make friends with them and say, oh, by the way, I have a podcast. So they'll tell their friends and then they'll tell their friends. And that's where that locomotive gets going. But building the podcast is really kind of part one. Promoting the podcast is part two.
Yeah, totally. I think you do very well at that promoting piece in terms of getting to hang out where your audience is and being helpful. And I was going to ask you to speak about that a little bit because you do it really well. I see you on Facebook and various groups. I see you posting on Twitter here and there, you know, just various resources. And people have come to know Dave Jackson as one of those podcasting guys. And I'm sure you get many clients from that. So talk to us a little bit about that, about hanging out with your audience, getting to know them, being real, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I always say for the kind of steps that I take to grow my audience is number one, figure out who they are. And if you say, oh, everybody's going to listen to my show. Okay, step one is already wrong because if you try to be everything to everybody, you're going to be nothing to everyone kind of type thing. So know who your audience is, then figure out where they are. And if you can see them in person, that's even better. Danny Pena is a famous guy that does a video game show. And he would go when a big game would be released and they'd have like a Midnight Madness sale and come get the game before the day it's actually released. He would go and hand out business cards to people in line and say, oh, I do a show that you might like. So he went to where his audience was, knew who they were. And then step 3 is make friends with them. And everybody wants to skip this step because step 4 is tell them about your podcast. So everybody wants to figure out who your audience is, go where they are and tell them about your podcast. And I've done that. I did that. I walked into a forum again, back in the day before Facebook groups, there was a forum and it was ex-DJs. And I was like, oh, I have found the motherlode. This is my target audience, people that know how to talk into a microphone. And I walked in, I said, hey, I'm Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting. You should check out my podcast. I can help you podcast. And I mean, instantly I was banned for spamming people. So you have to come in and just bring value to any conversation that is going on. Then once they know you and they go, oh, this guy seems to know what he's talking about. Then you say, oh yeah, I mentioned this on a podcast a couple weeks ago. And when you can do that, then they'll actually go listen because they seem to think you know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And they have a need that you're trying to help meet. Yeah. So yeah, it comes across as generosity then.
Yeah.
Rather than, and helpfulness.
And then the other thing you're doing is you're listening. Mark Maron at Podcast Movement, somebody asked him, they said, wow, you're such a great interviewer. What's the key to that? And he goes, oh, it's easy. Listen. And I think sometimes we're so used to kind of thinking about what can I say? What can I say? Well, what you're saying should be based on what you heard your audience wants to hear. And I think sometimes we kind of get focused too much on us and not so much on them. And it really is, your podcast is about them. It's not about you.
Absolutely.
And then it's just a matter of lather, rinse, repeat. Figure out who your audience is, go to where they are, make friends, tell them about your podcast, listen to what they want to hear, and then keep going.
Yeah. And I think that make friends part is so vital because of what you said about how we want to jump to that thing of promoting instead of making friends, because making friends is hard, it takes time. And the example I give to my clients quite often is, we all knew that kid in 4th grade who was always saying, hey, look at what I did. Look, I can jump high. I can run fast. Look, I have new shoes. Look, my daddy's doing, we all knew that kid and we didn't want to be around that kid. And that's who we are when we go into the forums and say, look at my podcast, listen to my podcast, subscribe to my podcast. We're being that kid.
You mean you can't jump higher with new shoes?
Well, my 4-year-old grandson still thinks you can, so I'm not telling him otherwise.
Right. That's funny. I think everybody does know that guy. That's a great example.
There was a kid in every neighborhood who was like that, and nobody liked him. And there's a good reason for that. He's not making friends. He's just being self-centered.
Yeah.
And we just can't do that to people. There is a reason it's called social media.
When I was a musician, there was one saxophonist for hire. and everybody knew him. So if you ever needed a saxophone, you knew who to call, but most people didn't want to call him. He was actually a really talented musician, but it was just, that was his personality. I mean, if you met this guy for 2 seconds, he was sticking a business card in your hand. And it was kind of like, what, who are you? I'm not even in a band. Oh, well, here, if you know anybody, I'm available for hire. It was kind of like, wow, what a weird first impression.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. That's an immediate turnoff to me. You know, I learned that the hard way on the internet because for some reason, the barrier of the computer screen makes us feel like that's okay. I don't know why that is, but it's not okay.
I had somebody ask me, how do I go about getting the names and email addresses of my audience last week? And I'm like, there's no hosting company on the planet that will give you that. You're going to have to get that through some sort of form or a survey, something like that, but it's not going to come automatically. And they were like, oh, because my whole goal is to just, you know, they were ready with the fire hose to promote their products. And I'm like, yeah, you got to build that audience and gain their trust first before you can start promoting your stuff. But that was their step one was, how do I get their email address? And I'm like, not sure that's going to work.
Yeah, well, I think it'll work if you use that email address in the right way,
right,
to build the relationship and start a conversation. I am on a mailing list of one life coach. I do some coaching and stuff like that on the side as well. And I learned so much from him. He sends out a daily email and very seldom is it selling anything. It's always conversational, asking you what your opinion on the subject is, you know, this and that. And you feel like you know the guy after a while. And you feel like he knows you because when you reply, he replies back. That's the purpose.
See, that's the key.
A good email list.
And think about it. If he said, hey, I just read this book. It's really, really good. You should check it out. Are you not going to tell me you're going to go click on that and read it?
Yeah, I'm at least going to look at the book and see if it's something I think I could use right now.
Yeah.
You know, because I respect it. Well, Dave, this has been great. I don't want to keep you too long. I'm curious, you know, what's something you are real jazzed about right now in your business, your life, whatever, that the podcastification audience could help you with or maybe would benefit from?
Boy, jazzed. I'm just jazzed that podcasting is just growing. It keeps growing. And granted, it's not growing as fast as we want. I'm kind of excited that Apple has dipped their toe a little deeper into the podcasting pool. I think that's going to be a fun kind of scenario to roll out, because by the end of the year, we're going to be able to see how far people are listening. And when we're talking about, is your show good? That's going to be fun.
Yeah.
I think it's like, I wish I knew how far people were listening. Maybe you don't, because that could be an eye opener.
Yeah. I mean, if listeners aren't aware of what Dave's talking about, Apple announced this past week that they're going to be rolling that out through their software apps. So through the Apple Podcast app and things like that, you'd be able to tell how far into an episode your listeners are actually listening. So similar to what YouTube does right now, where you can go into your stats and see how far somebody watched. It'll be similar to that on podcasts. And I'm with you, Dave. I think people who are all jazzed about getting sponsors, say I get 7,000 downloads per episode, they're going to find it harder to find a sponsor in some cases because they might get 7,000 downloads, but only 400 of those are actually being listened all the way through.
So I'm jazzed about that. And just, you know, every time I turn around, I just watched a movie, something like Office Christmas Party or something like that. And they talked about podcasting twice in there. Jimmy Fallon talks about podcasting. He had the guy from S-Town on his show. So it just seems like it's getting more and more and more mainstream. So I'm just jazzed to keep seeing it grow.
Yeah, me too. So Dave, schoolofpodcasting.com, is that your home?
That is me. That's where you can find me.
So Dave, I appreciate all you've done for podcasting. I think you were one of the first people I ever listened to when I was trying to figure out how to do this podcast thing. And I had a little bit of radio background, so I had the tech stuff down fairly well. And I came into it just at that time where it was fairly easy to do. It didn't require RSS enclosures and all that kind of stuff, at least on my end of it. You know, I could just upload and go. And you've taught me a lot, and I know you've taught so many people a lot. If you guys listening have not listened to Dave's show, man, great stuff. And Dave is just who you hear on this show. He's an everyday guy. He likes talking about this stuff and teaching people how to do it. So go over there and check him out. Dave, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thanks, Gary. Thank you very much.
Hello. So now you know the Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting. I just loved that conversation. Dave is such a fun guy to talk with. I mean, he's got great illustrations. He thinks of things just real quickly off the cuff. He's just a great guy. So go over and check out his show. at schoolofpodcasting.com. If you find yourself in need of someone to kind of coach you along, well, Dave is the podcast coach. And he's one of those guys that I trust and that I think has some great things to tell people and to walk people through. So you heard a bit of it on this episode. I encourage you to go over there and check it out. And between Dave and I I think you'll be good. You should be rolling. So that's it for this episode of Podcastification. You know what time it is. It's time to go out and make it a podcastificating day. This show is brought to you by Podcast Fast Track, where my team provides professional podcasting services without the time suck. Full production, editing, and show notes all in one monthly subscription package. You can find out more at podcastfasttrack.com. Now go out and make it a podcastificating day. Audio editing and show notes by podcastfasttrack.com. Get 15% off your first month by mentioning this show.
And this might be an edit point, Carrie, but I don't hear you anymore.
Yeah, I muted myself.
Okay, good. I was like, wow, okay, I was just making sure you're still...
Yeah, I muted myself so that I could sniffle and take a drink. So
excellent.
Edit point.
Okay, sorry about that.